Hey there, Caps fans. Welcome back to the Janaea Talks Caps podcast. And hello and welcome to any Carolina Hurricanes fans who are following along with us now as well. It is that time again, boys and girls and babes. The Caps are soaring into the Stanley Cup playoffs, and we are here with our first official podcast of the postseason. Now, with all due respect to the regular season, I do think I speak for everyone when I say that it drags on and on and on every single year, and we all really just can't wait to get to the playoffs pretty much every single year. The regular season has its ups and downs, it has its exciting moments, but all in all, I mean, it's like the regular season is pretty much the same thing for Caps fans every single year, am I right? And I'm not knocking it because it's all a bunch of very good things happening for us most of the time, but it's just that it has become rather predictable at this point. The Caps win the division, whether it is the Metropolitan Division or whether it was the old Southeast Division back in the day. It hasn't mattered, and it doesn't matter because the Caps still win it, I can almost say, literally every single year. And then Alex Ovechkin, of course, wins his annual Rocket Richard Trophy as the league's leading goal scorer, etc., etc., etc. Whatever. That is all amazing, but I am ready for the playoffs. How about you all? The Caps will face the Carolina Hurricanes in round one after a last-minute desperation onslaught on the New York Rangers by the Pittsburgh Penguins in game number 82 of the regular season, as the Penguins desperately tried to avoid playing against the Caps in the first round. And they got their wish as they tied the game against the Rangers and eventually went on to lose in overtime, but it did not matter because the loser point was already enough to secure third place in the Metro Division for them, and they knew that. So what happens is the Canes get the Caps, which is probably not good news for Storm Surge season, as the Capitals, of course, swept the season series against the Hurricanes, going 4-0-0, including 2 wins in the last weeks of the regular season. This is the first time in the history of these two franchises that they will meet one another in the postseason. And speaking of the Storm Surges, I just want to say to any Canes fans out there listening right now that as a Capitals fan, I happen to love the Storm Surges that you guys do. I like to see fun in the game of hockey, and our Capitals too. If you've ever watched any Caps games, then you know how much fun this Caps team likes to have. They're basically like overgrown children with 100-mile-an-hour slap shots. So for me, I love it, and all the more power to you, Canes fans. And between the Storm Surges and Evgeny Kuznetsov's bird celebrations, why don't we see if we can't make Don Cherry's head explode at some point in this series? The battle of the biggest jerks in the NHL. I love it. Also, fuck Don Cherry. So, to preview this series, we are going to look at the 3 obvious categories and kind of just debate who's got the edge in each. So we're going to look at the offense, the defense, and the goaltending of both of these teams. So first up is the offense. For the Caps, it's basically all of the usual suspects, making this team one of the most offensively potent teams in the NHL. They've returned their entire top 9 forward group from last year's Stanley Cup win, and it's probably the best top 9 forward group in the league. They have a league-high 7 20-plus goal scorers, as well as having the current reigning Rocket Man, Alex Ovechkin, who wins the goal-scoring title again this season with a league-high 51 goals. It is his 8th 50-plus goal season, and it's also his 8th time winning the goal-scoring title, which is a league record. He was previously tied with Bobby Hull, who won it 7 times, but we know Ovi doesn't like ties. Unfortunately for Leon Draisaitl, the top-end talent on this Caps team is very, very high, and the depth scoring, of course, also is very high. As I mentioned, every guy to a man in the top 6 forward group eclipsed the 20-goal mark this season, and you also had Brett Connolly on the third line chipping in 22 goals as well. So Alex Ovechkin, Nicholas Backstrom, Evgeny Kuznetsov, TJ Oshie, Jakub Vrana, Tom Wilson, that's your top 6 up front. Of course, Caps fans already know this, but I'm also just reciting it for any Carolina Hurricanes fans who are listening as well. And also, with maybe the best third line in hockey, you have Carl Hagelin, Lars Eller, and Brett Connolly coming right behind them and giving no rest at all to opposing defenses. So that is the Capitals' top 9. You can take your pick of who you want to fill out the forward group for the Capitals on any given night, and it probably depends a little bit on who the opponent is and which style of game the Capitals want to play, as they are fully capable of playing any style that you want to. We saw that during last year's Stanley Cup run with this group. They can play fast, they can play physical, they can play run and gun and outscore you, or they can pick their spots and win a low-scoring defensive chess match. They can win with finesse, or they can simply beat the shit out of you. But that's what makes this team so great, is that they are very versatile and they have lots of options for who they want to play on the fourth line and for what they want to do up and down the lineup. All in all, the options to fill out the lineup on any given night include high-end offensive talent Andre Burakovsky, who scored 2 goals in Washington's Game 7 win against Tampa Bay in last year's Eastern Conference Final. You've got Nick Dowd, who set career highs in every offensive category this season, his first season with Washington. You've got a guy with quite a bit of finesse, a great passer and puck handler in Travis Boyd, who put up 20 points while playing in just 53 games in his rookie season. You've got the speedy Chandler Stevenson, who's extremely responsible defensively, and he's a great penalty killer. And he was also a regular on the fourth line for the Capitals that won the Stanley Cup last season. You've also got Dmitry Yaskin, if you want another big body who's great on the walls and on the forecheck, and if you want to add some extra physicality to a team that's already very mean. And don't forget, you've also got Devontae Smith-Pelly as well, one of last year's playoff heroes who scored 7 goals for you as a fourth liner on last year's Stanley Cup winning team. So if you need, again, a little bit of extra clutch scoring, as well as another extra jolt of physicality, then you put him in the lineup. He's been playing very well down in Hershey, and he looks ready to be called up at any time. All in all, the Caps are in great shape up front. They were top 5 in the league in goals scored this season, and their supreme talent and depth up front are a couple of the big reasons why. Another big reason why is John Carlson on the back end, who got absolutely robbed of the Norris Trophy last season as he led the entire NHL in points among defensemen, and he actually finished this season with 2 more points than he had last season. He racked up a total of 70 points in 80 games this season to go along with a plus 21 rating, and this is after he put up 20 points in 24 playoff games last spring. And was obviously a big reason why the Capitals won the Stanley Cup. He should be one of the top 3 vote getters for the Norris Trophy this season as well. And then on the power play, of course, the Capitals are always dangerous. And it's universally known that the best way to defend against the Capitals' power play is to not take any penalties. The power play went into a bit of a lull to end the regular season, but they've been the top power play in the National Hockey League for over a decade now. And given that the first unit in particular has been together and terrorizing opponents for a full 5 years now, I wouldn't read too much into the late regular season lull. They will have their shit together for the playoffs, just as they did last spring, when their power play clicked at a ridiculous nearly 30% efficiency en route to them winning Lord Stanley's Cup. You notice that I keep mentioning that we won the Cup. That's because I'm still not over it. I will never be over it, and it is the greatest thing to ever happen. On the Canes side of things, offensively, they're certainly much less potent on offense than their opponent in this series is. The Canes averaged 2.96 goals for per game this season. Good for 16th in the league out of 31 teams, but second last among the playoff-bound teams. So they were a middle-of-the-pack team offensively during the regular season, but now that the pack has been whittled down and the competition has become stiffer, they're in the bottom 2 teams out of the 16 teams that qualified and will be taking part in the Stanley Cup playoffs. So good enough to get by during the regular season, but likely not good enough to keep up with Alex Ovechkin and co. over the course of a 7-game series. They do take a lot of shots, the most in the league actually, but unfortunately for them, they don't convert a very high rate of those shots into goals. I'm a believer of Corsi being a predictor of future success to an extent, but I'm also a believer that it's not the be-all, end-all, because different teams have different talent levels, and if you have an Alex Ovechkin taking 100 shots at the net, Alex Ovechkin taking 100 shots at the net is still going to produce more goals. He's still going to put more pucks in the net than, say, an Andrei Svechnikov, who's taking 150 shots or 200 shots at the net. So you see my point. The Canes are good enough to get a lot of shots, but not good enough to actually put a lot of those pucks into the net. They'd be a much more dangerous team if they had a few guys who could finish on those chances at a higher rate. The Capitals, to contrast, they take way fewer shots, but yet score way more goals. And given that the last time I checked, goals are still what wins hockey games, I will take the Caps' penchant for finishing on their chances versus the Canes' penchant for taking a lot of shots. When you look at the Hurricanes forward group, their top 6 is made up of Sebastian Aho, Nino Niederreiter, our old pal Justin Williams, who is still awesome and still has ridiculously nice hair for a 37-year-old, Jordan Staal, Teuvo Teravainen, and Michael Ferland. I've got to admit, I like a lot of those players, and I would not mind having them on my team, but for the most part, Sebastian Aho being the only exception, for the most part, I would want them on my team in a middle 6 role. And that's kind of the problem for the Hurricanes, is that they just simply don't have enough top-end talent. They don't have enough real top-line players to fill out their top line. They have good players, to be sure, but they're missing those 2 or 3 game-breaker type of players who can sort of score at will and change an entire playoff series. So I'm sticking with my theory that they are good enough to be in the playoffs, but not good enough to go very far. Of course, players make names for themselves all of the time in the Stanley Cup playoffs, so anything can happen. Maybe we won't be having this discussion about the Canes lacking game breakers next season if a couple of those guys find another level in the playoffs. You never know. We saw an entire city chanting DSP last year, so we should know firsthand. Sometimes the guys that you don't necessarily expect make a huge impact. Although I will say that I totally did expect Devontae Smith-Pelly to make that big of an impact, and that's why I was so excited about the Caps signing him. Seriously, you can go back and look at my comments on social media from that time. I fucking called it. Anyways, things also get sticky for the Hurricanes when you compare their third line's production to that of the Capitals' third line. The Canes' third line, Andrei Svechnikov, I don't know why I can't say that guy's name, Andrei Svechnikov, Lucas Wellmark, and Jordan Martinook. Not a lot of fear being cast into the hearts of opponents when you hear those names, although Svechnikov is a promising rookie and will likely grow into an even better player in the years to come. He did get 20 goals this season, but other than that, again, they're good players, but just not on the level of the defending champion Washington Capitals. All told, altogether, the Hurricanes' third line put up 45 goals and 90 points this season, while the third line on the Capitals side put up 52 goals and 126 points. The big X factor on the third line that the Capitals are going to have over almost any team that they face is Brett Connolly, who put up nearly 50 points this season while skating just 13 minutes and 20 seconds per game, and getting almost no power play time as well, thanks to the Capitals' supreme depth up front. Speaking of power plays, since we are talking about the offense, we have to talk about the power play. So the power play for the Hurricanes clicked at a 17.8% rate of efficiency this season. That's 20th in the league. So, you know, you get where I'm going with this. Overall, offensively, it's definitely a big advantage to the Capitals in this series. But where the Hurricanes might have an advantage in this series is on the defensive side of the puck. So let's talk about that next and give all of the Canes fans out there something to cheer about, shall we? Although hopefully they will not have much to cheer about in this series, so we might as well just get them all excited during the preview. Defensively, the Hurricanes were a top 10 team in the league this season. They were tied for 7th, actually, with none other than the President's Trophy winning Tampa Bay Lightning. So the Canes, they allowed 2.70 goals against per game, which it sounds like a lot if you were a dead puck era aficionado, but it's really not a lot when you consider that there were more goals scored this season, 7,664 goals in total. There were more goals scored this season than in any other season in NHL history. Of course, we have to put a little bit of an asterisk next to that number because it does include shootout goals. And there are also more teams, obviously, 31 of them now, playing than there were back in, say, the high-scoring 1980s. And so more teams means more games played, and more games played obviously means more goals being scored. But still, 7,664 goals is a very big number, no matter which way you want to slice it. So the Hurricanes, they have a solid defense core, or at least a solid top four, thanks to Jacob Slavin, Dougie Hamilton, Brett Pesce, who I'm told the Maple Leafs tried to make a human sacrifice to get him to Toronto at the trade deadline, and Justin Falk fills out their top four. Things do get a little dicey on the third pairing with Hayden Fleury and Trevor Van Riemsdyk. But that's kind of to be expected with most teams in this salary cap world that we live in now. The Canes' penalty kill as well was also pretty solid this season. They killed off 81.6% of opponents' opportunities. That's good for 8th in the league, and that included as well killing off 8 of the 10 Capitals power plays during the season series between the two clubs. Although, of course, it didn't really matter, as Washington won all 4 of those games anyways. For the Capitals, a long-term injury to top 4 defenseman Michael Kempny has muddied things up a bit, and it's a damn good thing now, more than ever, that they made the trade for Nick Jensen at the deadline. The way that I see it, they're about exactly as strong on the blue line as the Caps team that won the Stanley Cup last season. You're now missing Kempny, of course, but you've added Jensen. They're very similar players, and a lot of folks actually suggest that Nick Jensen is even better than Michael Kempny. So you basically just swap one for the other, but the key will be finding the combinations that work on the back end. As Kempny has been a literal perfect fit alongside, should have won a Norris Trophy already, John Carlson. And although they're very similar players, the big difference between Kempny and Jensen is, of course, that Jensen is a right shot, while Kempny is a lefty. So the Caps will have to find the combinations that work, and as I alluded to in a previous podcast episode, playing your best defenseman in John Carlson on his unnatural side of the ice should not be an option. They have good alternatives to doing that. It's just a matter of whether or not Reardon is going to choose one of those good alternatives. It looks like they will at least start with Carlson playing on his off side. He'll be playing on the left side and Jensen playing on the right side on the top pairing. At least that's what it's been in practice the last few days leading up to Game 1. But talent-wise, this blue line certainly stacks up to the blue line that won the Cup for the Caps last season. It's all of these same players. You just swap out the injured Kempny for new guy Jensen. Of course, it would have been glorious if we had Jensen and Kempny healthy. Then we'd really be in good shape. But alas, dealing with injuries is always a part of the Stanley Cup playoffs. So the Caps are just getting a little bit of a head start in that department. But we're still in good shape with Carlson, Orlov, Niskanen, Jensen, Orpik, and Juice being the 6 starters. Numbers-wise, over the course of the full regular season, the Caps were a middle-of-the-pack team defensively. They allowed 3.02 goals against per game, which puts them at 17th in the league. So right in the middle of the league. And those numbers, of course, they don't really tell the story of the season. A season in which the Caps started off pretty terribly and then got their shit together after the All-Star break and the trade deadline. Some level of Stanley Cup hangover was always to be expected, and it happened in the first half of the season. But ever since the Caps got that week plus of rest at the All-Star break combined with the NHL-mandated bye week, they've been a different team all over the ice, and that certainly includes on defense. So, I wouldn't put too much stock into those numbers in the Capitals' case, because they played so differently defensively the first half of the season as compared to the last half of the season. It's how you finish, not how you start. Just ask the Buffalo Sabres, who actually had a 10-game winning streak early on in this season. That obviously seems laughable now. And on the penalty kill, when we look at that for the Caps, it's the same story for the Caps. The numbers for the season as a whole do not look good, but there was a massive improvement after the bye week, and especially after the trade deadline when they added Carl Hagelin and Nick Jensen to the equation. Both of them obviously are terrific penalty killers. But overall, I do have to give the edge defensively to the Carolina Hurricanes in this series. And last but not least, certainly not least, as I'm a goalie myself, and I don't mean to brag, but it is unequivocally the most important position on any team. So certainly not least of all, we've got the goaltending matchup. Braden Holtby versus Peter Mrazek. This is an interesting one. On the one hand, you've got a Vezina Trophy winner, the guy who posted the NHL record for wins in a single season with 48 of them, and the winner of last year's Stanley Cup. On the other hand, you've got Peter Mrazek. So I kind of highlighted in a previous episode on this podcast just how inconsistent Mrazek has been over the course of his career. And that's a big reason why he's been traded multiple times already. But at the same time, he is capable of getting hot, and he is capable of getting hot against the Caps. However, if you are betting actual money on this series, then I certainly would not go putting all of your eggs in that basket. It's kind of a bit of a hope and a prayer for Hurricanes fans, but it could happen, and I think that the Canes need it to happen if they are going to have a chance to win this series. But even with all of that being said, anyone who actually thinks that the Hurricanes have the edge in goal heading into this series is nothing short of a living, breathing Looney Tune. It's Braden Holtby. The track record speaks for itself. Sorry, Canes fans. So, we've broken down the offense, edge to the Capitals, the defense with the edge to the Hurricanes, and the goaltending with the edge to the Capitals. Overall, I think the Canes are going to have to play a near-perfect and extremely structured series in order to have a hope of taking down the defending Stanley Cup champs. My X factors for Carolina would definitely be that Peter Mrazek needs to get hot and stay hot, and frustrate the Caps' powerhouse offense, and that Michael Ferland will need to, let's call it, out Tom Wilson himself. That is to say that Ferland needs to outscore, out-pester, out-hit, out-agitate Big Tom. I don't think it's going to happen, but then again, I remind everyone, Wayne Gretzky was traded once upon a time, so anything can happen. For the Capitals, they just need to play their game. Don't get frustrated if Mrazek does get hot initially. Just stick to the plan, stick to the script, and do that hockey thing. Until next time, Caps fans and Canes fans and anyone and everyone else who might be listening, let's stay classy throughout these playoffs, and no matter who you cheer for, can we all just agree right now that Schittsburg is the real enemy here. United we stand, and we're going to have a podcast episode coming up after every Capitals game during these playoffs, so stay tuned for analysis and general shenanigans and debauchery. It is the best time of the year, boys and girls and babes. So Merry Christmas, hockey fans, and let's go Caps.